What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. This is going to be a first for me. We are sitting down and filming a podcast interview conversation kind of thing with a special guest, which I'll introduce in just a second. If you're new to the channel, my name is Trevor Steele. I've been flying for over 13 years, have trained over 582 students, and today I want to sit down with someone who's flown a variety of different wings. I'll introduce him in a moment and discuss all things paramotor wings and stories and all of that stuff. I appreciate you guys sitting down for this interview, and if you're interested in more videos like this, let us know in the comment section down below. In today's video, we have an individual named Scott. I met Scott a couple of years ago, and Scott's story goes back years and years and years and years. He's been flying since 2008, and I think of him as this wicked wizard god of weather. He just understands all things weather, and he's got a variety of different experiences with wings, expeditions, wicked flights, all of that stuff. Scott's been on a pursuit of finding his new wing. He spent over 800 hours on an ITV Piper 1, and he has been since flying a bunch of stuff over the last handful of days to find his next glider. I want to chat about some of the things he's seeing, the characteristic differences, all of that stuff. So, Scott, welcome to the video.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's a pleasure of mine to sit down and conversate with you. You don't know this, but in the background over the last handful of years, I've just heard so many things about Scott Ritchie. He just knows so much. The infamous Scott. Scott would know. What would Scott do? I think Judson always had a saying, and it was like, what would Scott do?
He does say that.
Yeah. Anytime we would sit the field wondering whether the weather was good or whatever, he'd go, what would Scott do? And then he'd be like, oh, Scott would catabatic flow down there and fly over this. And he'd go up and he'd know. And it was just this running joke. So I've enjoyed hearing and learning more about weather with you. And most importantly, I've really enjoyed the last handful of days where you've been flying a bunch of different wings.
Yes.
And we've gotten to conversate about it and talk about all the characteristic differences between one and another.
I've enjoyed it too.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about some of the gliders you've been flying, what we're seeing, what we're feeling, and let's just get that ball rolling.
Well, originally I started out on the Eden 3 way back when.
That's way back, man.
Muse 2, and then Gradient Golden 3, if you remember that one, in about 2011. That was my first Jeff Hammond trip.
Just so you know, I was 11. So no, I don't remember.
And then it went into a myriad of dudek wings and other cross-country type expeditions that we've done, flying all over the place. And then 2020, the virus hit. We stopped some expeditions. I stopped going. And I've been on that Piper 1 now for too long. That's too many hours for a wing. It's not a...
I think of you as the 800-hour Piper 1 pilot.
Not a good thing to do.
That's a lot of freaking hours on it, man.
In 3 years, yeah.
Yeah.
3.5 years, that's...
I don't even want to know how many gallons of gas and oil you've burned through in that.
Well, in the last 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks here, it's been 40 gallons.
Well,
and I'm out, so I got to go buy some more today. But yeah, there's definitely something different with this new gen of paramotor gliders. They're all so much more efficient. I've seen my RPM levels drop from 12 to 1400 less RPM because they're that much more efficient.
Really?
They're impressive.
So I'm sure you know this. I'll reiterate it. I flew a Dominator until 2022. And I stepped into a Viper 5 and a Sirocco 3 and like the current kind of lineup of wings. So as far as previous generations and stuff like that, I don't really have any experience. The only new wing that really has come out that I'm on is the Viper XC. And so I like your perspective of the history further back. I like that you have perspective of a wider range of wings dating further back, because I found it interesting for you to say that you've seen a big jump in technology and efficiency in the modern wings, because I don't have that perspective.
Let's put it a simple way. I used to fly a Dudek Nucleon WRC, which stands for with rod control, and it was a 29-meter wing. And then we moved into the 27-meter wing, and I flew, and that's equivalent today. A 27-meter wing is equivalent to like a 20 to 22
Yeah.
in today's technology. So the size of the wing for the same efficiency level has gone significantly smaller. That's a huge reduction. I mean, you're talking,
Yeah.
what, 20, 30% reduction in the wing size because of the technology and software and the types of things that we've been able to the what's the right word? The manufacturers have been able to establish in the design of the wings. They're getting incredible
Yeah.
software and all kinds of stuff. And so the wings have gotten a lot smaller. I launched a 27-meter Dudek WRC in like 2016 or something at 14,000 feet. And
Dude, that's up there.
it's same launch technique, same everything,
Yeah.
but that's equivalent to like a 20-meter wing today.
I find that crazy, man.
Yeah.
I think that's wicked. So generally speaking, as you go down in size, you get more resistance to collapses as you become more loaded per inch on fabric. So as you're going from these 27s down to the 20s, they're still equally as efficient. What other characteristics do you think are changing just in that size change?
Honestly, the design technology of a 20-meter wing today is the same as a 27 it was back then. The load range, the weight range, the handling characteristics are almost the same as it was back then as it is now. You're just flying a smaller wing. They've just gotten better at more efficient and turning and rolling and roll rate and all that stuff. It's how it felt on a bigger wing back then. The weight range, if you go back and you look, let's just say 10 years, the weight range was the same, but for a bigger glider. Now it's the same, but for a smaller glider.
Yeah, they've just been able to shift it.
Yeah. It's not like taking today's wing and going up to a size 24 or 26 and foot launching it, because it's that's a school bus of a wing for someone that's just foot launching. Great for trikes, great for heavier loads, but no, it's not like we were flying these wings severely underloaded. That's just what the weight range was back then.
So let's roll that into discussing some of the wings that you've been flying out here. Walk us through some of those gliders. What are you noticing from one to another? I know you mentioned everything's feeling great. Tell me more.
So we hit the Dudek Warp 2. We did and I say we as in you and I.
Yeah.
We did the Ozone XC.
Yep.
The Gin Falcon 2.
You've been doing 20s.
Piper 2.
On all of, well, exclude that one. Yeah.
The Piper 2, ITV Piper 2. We've been hitting all these different brands. The Colorado 2 by MacPara. All these wings. And all of a sudden you start, like I said to you the other day, in that class of wing, which maybe I'm wrong in the category, but it's a low intermediate wing, maybe a high advanced, but low intermediate wing. It's a cross-country designed wing. It's not an AWAC design or Gin Carve designed for acro or slalom. They're more for that cross-country, maybe playing a little bit, but it's more of that, it's more stable.
It feels like it was designed to be an all-arounder.
Yeah, good all-around wing.
Yeah.
But not a first wing. Maybe some of them not even a second wing, but Colorado 2 would be a good second wing.
It's kind of the end of the line, high performance, all-around wings.
There you go. That's a great way of saying it. You start flying all these wings back to back. I was flying 3 different wings a day for the last week and a half, every day just trying new wings and then going back and flying it the same wing a second time, and then trying the 5th wing we tried a 3rd time, and just and your opinion changes every flight because you're learning more about the wing and you're flying it in different conditions and et cetera. And it's almost to the point now with all these different wings, it's like all of them are cheesecake.
Yeah.
They're all really good. And it's just a matter of what sprinkle topping. Do you want blueberry cheesecake? Do you want strawberry cheesecake? What topping do you want on something that's already awesome?
Yeah.
And that really comes down to the pilot, the user, and what they see as their priority list. Do you want a wing that's more stable? Do you want a wing that's more playful? Do you want a wing that's easy to launch? And you can almost pick a brand and say, this brand usually launches like this. This brand usually launches like that.
Would you say that the brands are almost getting a stride and they're holding very consistent with one wing to the next?
Yes, not all. There's exceptions in every brand. And there's that one wing that it doesn't follow the mold of that designer.
Yeah.
And that's what it really comes down to. In addition to that, you look into the wing manufacturers and the designers have changed. Even within Ozone or something, the main designer will change, and as a result, you get the behavior characteristics of the wing changes because the designer changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you want to dive into that?
Yeah, let's do it.
You want me to start?
Go ahead.
Yeah, you start talking about like dudek. I've been flying dudek for 15 years. And you look at the dudek wings and you can pretty much, anybody that's been flying a dudek wing or has owned one before goes, it launches like a dudek. I'm sure you've heard that before.
I said that to you about the work too.
Yeah, you have to put a little extra oomph in that launch. You have to hold those A's a little longer, and you don't slow down and look at your wing. You keep energy into that wing as you're launching. They're a little harder to bring up. They're a little harder to get in the air. But boy, once they are in the air, dudek wings are known for being rock solid.
Yeah.
Like it feels you're 50 pounds heavier on that wing because it is stable and solid and you feel secure and it is going to cut through stuff. Dudek's one of the few manufacturers that have truly done reflex right. They have the aileron in the back. The back of the wing actually goes up and it creates pitch stability by that airflow coming over the top and they lock in. And I feel the best stability on a dudek wing trimmed out. ITV has been another really good one where they have offered with like the Piper One
Yeah.
a solid reflex profile. And a lot of these other manufacturers say it's reflex. It's a reflex wing. But you fly behind it, you fly next to it, and you look at somebody else trimmed out, and it's straight. It's a straight profile. In my opinion, I may not understand the definition as well as how it may have been defined recently, but that's a semi-reflex wing, not a full reflex wing. And you're essentially, in a semi-reflex wing, you are flying 75% the size that it's stated. So if you're flying a 23-meter wing, you trim out, you're flying a 20-meter wing.
Is that due to loading?
It's due to releasing the pressure on the D's and C's, and you're flying essentially a smaller wing because the last trailing edge part of the wing becomes ineffective.
Does that affect aspect ratio?
It does. It changes your aspect ratio, it changes your loading, and it changes its behavior characteristics. Also, and more importantly, changes where the center of the gravity of the wing sits. And on a true reflex wing, it will shift further towards the leading edge and give you more stability than a semi-reflex. A semi-reflex wing, you're still kind of in between the AB range of the center of gravity, which is what allows you to use brakes fully trimmed out on a lot of these semi-reflex wings because it's not into a reflex profile. Because the center of gravity is still back a little bit, you can still touch brakes.
Yeah.
You get the center of gravity further forward on a true reflex wing and you touch the brakes, what you're essentially doing is shifting that center of gravity back really quick by hitting the brakes, which makes the front leading edge tuck.
Yeah. Most of these wings, from my understanding, aren't engaging into full reflex until after the trim range.
You mean on bar?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, like, maybe the Piper 2 is different, maybe the Piper 1, but, like, all the Ozone wings, you trim them out, you're not really in reflex.
Nope.
You have to apply bar.
That's correct. And if you even get full reflex on bar.
And that's what I was going to ask is, I mean, I guess it'd depend on every single one, but are you even receiving true full reflex on bar on all of these?
Totally depends on the design of the wing, and I would say on most of them, no. All you're doing is changing the angle of attack, not the profile.
Would you have any idea what the advantage is of that? Why would they choose that?
It's easy. That answer is consumer safety. Having the ability to reach up and grab the brakes, even though you're trimmed out, it makes the glider safer for most users.
Yeah.
Because they're not putting themselves into a potential collapse, pilot error-induced collapse. Whereas full reflex, you kind of need to know more what you're doing and what the glider's shape and behavior characteristics are. Your gut, when you start getting into turbulence, is to grab those brakes and to essentially say, I need to actively pilot it. First, you need to trim it to where you can actively pilot. Whereas a semi-reflex, you can go up and grab the brakes, trimmed out, I got nervous and I'm going to grab the brakes really quick. You don't want to do that on a full reflex.
You have to learn to trust it. You have to relieve control to the reflex.
Yep.
I have to admit, that's terrifying for me.
Yep. You have to trust the wing.
Yeah.
But there's a happy medium is what I found. Because I'm like you. I sit there and say, when I start getting into significant turbulence, I want to be the pilot in command. I want to control the wing. I don't want to trust the wing. I feel more capable with my skills than what the wing manufacturer told me it'll be stable.
Yeah.
So I'll trim in a little bit and actively pilot. And I'm noticing that also as a shift in all of the manuals, if anybody reads those.
Where they're recommending to trim it in?
All the manufacturers are recommending to trim in now to a 1/4 out trim setting and actively pilot the wing in severe turbulence. Whereas in the past, they didn't. They said, trim it out all the way, park the brakes, and trust the wing. Truly, the manuals used to say that. And that was what you were supposed to do. That is its most stable configuration.
So I've always thought that, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but the safest configuration in turbulence is fully accelerated. The second safest configuration is trimmed all the way in. That was historically on reflex profiles what I believed was the recommendation. It was only recently where the recommendation switched.
Exactly. And I've been finding that on a couple wings even launching. It used to be the recommendation, trim all the way in. You go back and look at almost any glider even 4 years ago. Trim it all the way in on launch and trim it all the way in on landing.
You see all the
now they're not doing that.
No, all the instructors out there still teach that. And I think
old school.
Yeah, it's the old school stuff.
The designers have changed, the wings have changed, and now they're almost all the wings I've been flying, they're all saying launch it an inch out, launch it on position 2, like on the Ozone XC. I tried to launch it, just a 1/4 inch out or so. Wouldn't want to do it. Really slow, really. I'm like, you put it on 2, butter.
Yeah.
And so the design of the wings are changing to be at its safest, easiest configuration, trimmed out a little bit, whereas in the past it was always trimmed all the way in. So it's counterintuitive from some of us that's been flying for more than 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I spent 9 years flying a wing that we launched trimmed out. We would trim out as far as we can.
So it's not new to you.
So when I switched over, as I talked to you on the Warp 2, my instinct is always trim it out more. I've always preferred the trimming it out more.
Yep.
As I get an easier inflation and a deeper brake range, but I have to be more deep in those brakes to prevent frontals. And I think of it like flaps, where if you trim it out, you can always pull some brake to compensate for that trims out, but you get the assistance of an easier inflation.
Yes, until you talk about the differences in human characteristics. A 5'2", 200-pound guy versus a
It's
6'2".
it definitely comes down to that thing we discussed earlier where it's a feel thing.
Yep,
You can't put an engineering brain there and say exactly this amount because
yep,
arm lengths are different, brake lengths are
yep.
different. There's a feeling to it, and you have to learn to feel, where that wing is hanging out above you, and how deep you are in those brakes and all
That
of that.
60-year-old pilot that is just learning to fly because he's finally gotten the itch to say, I want to go fly a paramotor, is going to launch with a significantly different amount of energy than a 20-year-old pilot who can run like a gazelle.
Yeah,
And so, how do you say where the perfect trim setting is? You can say here's a range of where the wing likes to be, but you can't say I will launch most of my wings a half an inch further closed at 7,000 feet than I will down at zero Salton Sea, below sea level elevation. You're going to want to trim it out a little bit because it's so lifty.
yeah,
Otherwise, you're just pulling fabric versus having it come up.
yeah. See, one of the things I discuss with my students is learning to fly what's being given to you.
Yep.
Fly the situation. Don't follow a procedure, because there's sometimes I see students just going through step 1, 2, 3, do thing 1, do thing 2, do thing 3 to launch a wing, and really you have to fly what's being handed to you. You have to
Yes.
learn what's the wing's doing, how to feel it, and what to do with it.
On the other hand, if you were to get a 5-year-old and say, make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, make it the way you think you would want to do it. I don't think I would want to eat that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So you've got to give them some instruction procedurally first, so then the next phase they can start to feel and where to adjust the procedure.
Yeah, they have to have an understanding of what changes.
Yeah.
And when and why and what's happening and what you're going to experience.
Yeah. And then we're not going to even discuss here about instruction technique and stepping under the wing versus staying on target versus
Whole long
that's a whole
conversation.
nother podcast. So
That's a whole nother one. Let's keep this rolling. Let's loop back to some of the wings you've flown and talk about some of the characteristic differences. I know you loved the Viper XC.
yeah,
I'd like your thoughts on that. Roll into the Warp 2 and the Piper 2.
I was just talking, I have to digress a little bit. A friend of mine that was just here said, I'm nervous about flying different equipment. I'm nervous about flying a new wing. I know my gear. I'm just at a stage now where I'm nailing my launches and landings. You put me onto a new wing and I got to learn all over again. And he's nervous about that. And I said, but by trying that different wing, even if you're not quite ready yet to buy a new wing, but in 6 months you might be, trying it now will make you a better pilot because you won't lock in on your muscle memory. And this is where I'm going with this, is that most pilots, in my opinion, will try a new wing and they're both loving it and hating it. They're hating it because it's different from what they're flying now in whatever characteristic. And because it's different, it's bad. But they're loving it because it's new and it's really crisp and fresh but they won't pull the trigger because it's change, because it's different, because their muscle memory in their launch techniques, their landing techniques, you have to change it based on what wing you're flying.
Yeah.
Just like you change the trimmers on what wing you're flying.
It's almost like that, fly what's being given to you versus a process.
Yes.
They start to memorize a process with that wing.
I think all of us, even me, is guilty of that muscle memory. I don't even look or think anymore when I launch a wing that I've been flying for a few months.
You just get so used to.
I know what it's doing. I know what it's doing overhead. By a little tug here, I know if it's off to the left.
Yeah.
Or a tug here, or if, I know it's falling a little bit to the right, and I just correct it without even looking at it. I can feel it, but on a new wing, it's going to give you different feedback. It's going to talk to you differently. It's going to give you,
It's going to challenge you.
yes. And so you have to adjust your muscle memory of where your hand positions are and how hard but the basics are the same. So going back to the basics and feeling what's happening is what I'm seeing. But my point is that a lot of pilots, they'll try a new wing and they won't like it merely because it's different.
Yeah.
Different from what they're flying now. Like you take an ozone free ride guy and you put him on a dudek and they're going to hate it because it's a totally different wing. And so if you have to go out and fly it more than a first impression.
This is actually, I like that you're mentioning this because it's hard to do reviews because of that, especially if you only get one chance to fly something.
You go onto YouTube, which do a lot to get information, and I look, and you see these YouTubes by reputable, honest people in the industry, a face and a name that you trust that is a current person in the industry, and you say, what does he think? He's doing a review on the ABC wing.
Yeah.
And you listen to it, and all of these reviews it's awesome. It is good. It is perfect for this type of pilot. And you don't get those negatives. You don't get the personal opinion negatives of a wing in those reviews because they don't want to trash their supplier or their relationship with that particular wing manufacturer. And so you don't hear anything bad. You have to almost go find the guy that flies like you, that has a YouTube channel that isn't a face and name you recommend, and he's comparing the Gin Falcon 2 to the Ozone Viper 5 XC. And you're like, okay, I kind of see what he's saying on the differences, but again, that's just that guy's opinion, but you pick up a little bit. It's hard to trust the guys that have the relationships with the manufacturers.
It's almost unfair.
Yeah.
Because I'm one of those guys.
Yeah.
And it's hard for that exact reason. There's a handful of reasons. Firstly, if you put me on, I almost exclusively fly ozone. It's just what I like. You put me on a dudek, and I immediately don't like the launch.
Yeah.
Because it's not an ozone.
It doesn't launch like an ozone.
Doesn't. But if you have an only dudek pilot who learned on a solo or universal and then transitioned to a nucleon and they fly a warp, they're going to love it. And you put them on a free ride and they're going to hate the launch because it doesn't launch like a dudek.
What's nice about a lot of the wings that I've been trying is everyone's getting better. All these manufacturers are getting better at what they do. It used to be you had to figure out what trim setting to put it at to even get it to come up on a launch.
Yeah.
You had to figure out that, the Eden 3 likes to be in a horseshoe and the Gradient likes to be in a V. And if you didn't set it up that way, the wingtips would come together on launch and it would what we call taco.
Yeah.
And it would just fall apart on you. If you stop putting energy into a dudek wing, it will just simply fall down. And if you try to launch it like an ozone wing, which is much lighter control, easier lifting, but also more sensitive in the air.
It's a trade-off.
Yes, and I think that's where we're going with this conversation. If you look at BGD, holy crap, when Bruce Goldsmith designs and the new designer Tom has gotten involved with some of the designs of the newer wings, fantastic, unbelievable precision in the design of the wing to make it feel like it is specifically tailored to you, to that. It's the efficiency, the proficiency, the design, you feel it. It's like you have quality when you're in a BGD. You're like, this thing is designed really well. But it may not suit that pilot because it may be a little too efficient. When you get more efficiency, you give up you get more sensitivity. You give up stability.
Yeah.
So if you've got a very lifty, low RPM wing that's just turns effortlessly, etc., you're also giving up trimmed out stability. You get on
Generally.
you get on like a dewdeck wing, man, you've got a lot more brake pressure, you've got a lot more rigidity, but you have massive stability in that wing. And so it now, going back to the cheesecake, what topping do you want on top?
You just have to figure out which ones tickle your pickle more.
Yeah.
Because we talked last night, I owned a Warp 2, I owned a Viper XC, same time. I spent 6 months with them. Because what I wanted to do was get comfortable with it, get comfortable with both. I spent a couple months on one, a couple months on the other, put them through a variety of different situations, and see which characteristics I prefer.
You know what the real answer is, if you want to cut down to it? There is no perfect wing. Everybody's going to want something a little different. And at the end of the day, you need more than one in your quiver.
Yes.
Seriously.
It's true.
I've always had 2 or 3 wings. I was fortunate enough to go on these trips 1 to 3 times a year, somewhere off in the world, and do this crazy expedition, and Jeff Hammond being the photographer, and every year they'd send us a new wing that we want you to photograph this wing in Peru. We want you to photograph. So I was getting a new wing every year, sometimes twice a year. Go fly this. Go take pictures of it. And I just got to see remember the APCO Force 1 or the APCO Force? Brilliant wings. And each few years they get better and better and better and better to the point where they're all really good. What flavor topping do you want on top?
What 5 toppings do you want?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to even, as we're having this discussion now, we're able to sit there and go, didn't like that because of this, didn't like that because of this. What is your mission?
Yeah.
If your mission is to fly more middle of the day, if your mission is to go cross country across the United States where you're not on coastline, you're going to want something a lot more rock solid. If your mission is to get up and just play at your local LZ within 30 miles of your local LZ, and remember we were talking about this the other day, where 80% of the population lives east of the Continental Divide, and 20% lives west. In the east, it's usually a little bit more humid, a lot more flat. They don't have the same mechanical turbulence, the same punchy thermals that we do here in the West. In the West, we've got mountains and canyons and mechanical turbulence and dry air to make the
rocket thermals.
Thermals punch you in the face versus just push you around.
Yeah.
And totally different type of flying, meaning totally different type of wing you would want.
Yep.
And yeah, you can pick a wing and say this is your best all-arounder. It's not going to be the most stable. It's not going to turn the best. I mean, you get on a gin carve, holy cow, that thing is just amazing how it turns. But I wouldn't want to be on a gin carve crossing, Colorado
No.
or New Mexico or Texas, like our Rio Grande trip.
Yeah.
We flew the entire Colorado River. How do you pick a wing to do that when half of it's in the mountains, half of it's in the flatlands? And you're doing the best that you can to stay over the river because of the thermals.
Yeah.
And you go 100 yards off the river and it's pretty bumpy. You stay right on the river and it's a little smoother till the wind picks up.
Yeah.
So back to what I was saying, you need to define your mission, and your mission. Iceland, great example. When we went to Iceland, you want a stable wing. We launch at 0 on a black sand beach at elevation 0. And within 20 minutes, you're at 6,000 feet over a glacier. Now imagine weather, we're talking about it. The ground is heating the black sand, sucking in onshore breeze from the ocean, smooth air. And then you go a mile inland, not even half a mile inland, and there's a glacier. That is cold, and it's a mountain, 6,000, 7,000 foot mountain of cold air mass coming down towards the beach. You get massive shear of the ocean breeze onshore and the glacial flow offshore. you need a really stable wing and a wing you know and trust.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to choose a different wing, but you do not want to bring a gin carve to that.
No.
To that, or a snake, a dudek snake, or an AWOC. You don't want to bring that kind of wing to that type of environment. You want a stable wing that you can trust and actively pilot at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think maybe dudek is still in that realm of super stable, but let the trims out and trust the wing. Whereas ozone is, I'm talking the XC, I can't talk all their whole lineup, but like the XC, it's more trim it in, active pilot it.
Yeah.
And trust yourself and your skills of active piloting it. Don't just trim it all the way out and expect it to be rock solid, because it won't.
Yeah.
Pilot the wing, get used to it. A lot of these, I'm noticing a lot of these wings, like the BGD Luna 3 and the Ozone Viper 5 XC, they're more like leaning on a paragliding type of wing. Whereas the Warp 2 is, or even like maybe the Drift Air, they're more of a strictly paramotor wing.
I always think of it as ozone has deep roots in paragliding. Their paramotor wings are more like paraglider wings.
Yeah.
Dudek's roots are paramotor. So you've got so much more reflex paramotor focus to it.
Yeah.
So my experience with ozone is always you got to be busy, because it's going to dance and it's going to talk like a paraglider wing is. I've always found the preference to be the Viper XC. We talked about this. We're going to roll right into discussing the nuances and differences. I liked the talkative. I preferred the Ozone Viper XC communication over the Warp 2's, I call it brick feeling, where you trim it out, let go, and it just goes through.
That's actually a good description. A little harsh on the brick, a little harsh on overly talkative. But you're right, you nailed it. The Warp 2 is solid, as solid as you would ever want a wing.
Yeah.
As a result, the Warp 2 requires a significant, I would even put it into a classification of, from low, medium, and high, a high amount of brake pressure.
Yeah.
My forearms, after flying the canyons the other morning when I flew it, I was sore, going, wow, that took a lot of pilot energy and effort to fly in the canyon with consistent left, right, left, right, left, right. I was exhausted. But at the same time, the ergonomics in the cockpit, standard dudek, comfortable.
Yeah.
Arm position, comfortable. Hand position, comfortable. And that's another thing I want to get into is the ergonomics in the cockpit.
Yeah.
Because I recognize that I need to adapt as the wings have changed and have adapted. 2D steering is amazing, but everybody's moving over to these square handles, big square handles. As a result, instead of flying your wing here, where your hands are closer to your earlobes, you're now flying with a wider stance on your arms, on your hands, where they're like a foot further away from your ears and you're 6 inches higher. And that's because of how they've tied in the tip steering, the type of brake handles that they're using, and the tightness in the Stabilio line. When I'm flying the Gin Falcon 2, the brake lines don't go to the tips. They stop at the last, I'll call it the 80% out. Your brakes actually don't go to the tips of the wing. Gin uses the Stabilio and then break it off at the tip. So you're only controlling the tip with your 2D steering. Luna 3, the brake line goes all the way to the tip.
Same with the Viper XC.
So same with the Viper XC. It goes all the way to the tip. So you don't need to use the tip steering as much. But you get on the Falcon 2 where it doesn't go to the tip, you can now just twist your hand And when you do a turn and micro checks, substantially less energy than having to pull. It's just a twist. And you can start a turn and then finish it. You can get into that motorcycle, as they call it, the pulling the handlebars this way as you to the right as you turn left. You have to adapt to what the wing is designed to do. And the technology and the design is amazing, but it's going to be too much for a lot of pilots. But going back to the design of how the lines are checked in, that changes how much energy you have to do as a pilot to get it to fly right. And you may or may not like that. Personally, my shoulders, my muscles are used to that hands at the earlobes type of flying, almost a little bit in front of your face. It's comfortable. That's where my muscles relax.
Yeah.
The newer style where there's more Stabilio 2D tip steering,
It's almost like they
built into
shifted
the handles.
focus towards the 2D.
that has pushed my hands further away and behind my ears almost, and it's so uncomfortable for me. I either have to learn to adapt and build those muscles or adjust to a different handle, toggle, or modify the length of the tip steering and brake handles. And that's where something like, a slalom racer's going to love your Game Changer 2-finger. And an old fart like me is going to like the 3-finger version 2, where you now can just do minor adjustments to get your hand placement correct. And that's something I've been learning to do that I've never had to do before, is make those minor adjustments to the length of the tip steering, to the length of the brakes, to fit the user.
Yeah.
Like moving your seat in the car. You can't just get into every car and expect to be able to work the clutch pedal. You got to move the seat up or back to get it to fit the user. And in the past, we never did that. We'd always get a wing before you even test flew it. You shorten the brakes 5 centimeters, 2 inches or so, and you went and flew. Because if you didn't, you would have no flare on landing. And so it was just standard operating procedure. Take the wing brand new out of the bag, shorten it 5 centimeters, and go fly. Now the manufacturer's actual manual says, don't do that. Don't shorten the brakes. And I get into these wings and I'm like, God, I need to lengthen these brakes. They're so tight and so, my hands are like above my ears and behind my head, and it's uncomfortable. I noticed that a lot with the Dudek, the Falcon 2. I need to change it where it's more comfortable. The Luna 3 was probably one of the most comfortable, ergonomically correct cockpits I've been in. The tip steering lines, when not 2D, when they don't have it tight in. And the reason why you don't need the 2D on the Luna 3 is because they've got the brake lines pairing off all the way to the tip. It's only if you need that extra boost of roll rate that you just grab those tip steering and then you let go and they snap back to the magnets. Brilliant. Whoever came up with that. It's awesome. Other wings, because they don't, like the Falcon 2, they don't carry the lines to the tip. So you have to have tip steering turned in to even get it to turn. Otherwise, you're just slowing it down, kind of. It's like slowing that side of the wing down to get it to turn. You need the 2D. You need to really do the two-dimensional pilotage to get it to roll the way you want to in a canyon. Again, it's what do you want? What flavor do you want? How do you want to adjust it? So, if they have these, I don't know, came up with these handles that you could adjust, that would be specific to the pilot, it would help. And some of them have.
I feel like somebody came up with some pretty sweet toggles.
Oh, there we go. But yeah, I think the focus has been, what I'm seeing now in the most recent wings is higher efficiency. Some have done too much. I think the Luna 3 has so much inherent efficiency built into the wing that I'm waiting 10% of the time for it to finish, so I finish its turn so that I can pilot it. It's like it was too lifty.
Yeah.
I'm behind an XC, an Ozone XC. We're going through the canyon, and I'm bouncing up and down because it's so efficient that I almost can't stay on track with in a formation with the guy in front of me. The XC, when I flew that in the canyon, absolutely the most intuitive. I think it does it. It behaved exactly the way I thought it should, the way I wanted it to. And yeah, there's times where I had to put a little bit more energy into a turn if it was a super 180 switchback or something, and I've got to pull a little harder than comfort. It's like you go from a brake pressure, easy medium to a hard pull to get it to finish the turn. Whereas the Luna 3, I didn't. It was it turned as harder than I would want it to at times because it's so efficient. The XC seemed like a better balance on that. But at the same time, XC, no twist of the wrist like you get with the Falcon 2. I mean, that's more. It gives more brake pressure, but higher amount of brake pressure. But you just twist your wrist and you roll into a turn. It's just phenomenal. But harder brake pressure. So I was more tired for flying the Falcon 2 because of the additional pressure and the way they've done their line setup on their trailing edge than the XC. So I was in the canyon and I got into some mechanical turbulence, and I thought the Falcon 2 behaved better than the XC. I felt, again, I've only been on it one time, so I need a second and a third and a fourth experience with it, and that's going to change. Initial impression is usually not right, but my initial impression was the Falcon 2 was slightly more stable than the XC. I felt the Falcon 2 handled mechanical turbulence and thermic turbulence better than the XC for a paramotor pilot.
By that, you mean less talkative?
Correct. And that's where we're going with this. It was the Falcon 2 was easier for me to transition into as a new wing because I'm flying it with a paramotor. If you think of the Luna 3 or the Ozone Viper 5XC as a paramotor wing / paraglider wing, and you trick your brain thinking I'm flying a paraglider, now those behave like you would expect them to. They're less of a, even though they are paramotor wings, they are less of a dudek straight rigid paramotor wing and more of a free flight wing that give you more information. They talk to you more. They tell you what's going on with the wing above your head without looking at it. You can say, okay, that's what's going on. So you have to adjust your mindset and say, these bumps are good. I was talking with Rob Candela about this just moments before you walked over. And he's flying the Viper XC. And he said it took him 3 months. He bought the wing, flew it, at first he demoed it in calm conditions. And he goes, I love this wing. And he demoed it like 5 times in calm conditions only. Then he bought the wing. Then he went to Ecuador or Nicaragua, I forget which, and flew it in some spicier conditions. And he goes, I might have made a mistake buying this wing. And he said it took him 3 months to change his mindset and get used to what those bumps and feelings and turbulence and how the wing was talking to him. Now he says, I completely trust what it's doing. And that talkative, I'm like, yeah, okay, talking, I hear you. Okay, got it. And that trust level, I think, is more important. The trusting of your wing. And then there's the whole nother topic of which I'm switching on you, but there's the flying characteristics, energy, roll rate, brake pressure, trimmers, how easy those come in and out, magnets, all the way down to the brake handles or the toggles. Then there's the launch and landing characteristics. And depending on what kind of pilot you are, if you're flying off an easy field like here in Salton Sea, you can launch and land any wing. You have enough room and space. But if you're out fly camping, if you're on a cross country going from A to B to C, and you don't even know what the LZ looks like until you get there, now having a wing that you trust on its launching capabilities and its landing capabilities, how much energy it stores, could be more important than how it flies trimmed out.
Yeah.
Could be more important than its roll rate.
That's why I ended up on a Viper XC.
Yeah.
That's what I told you yesterday.
Yeah.
In the environment, in the ecosystem I exist in,
Yeah.
I preferred how the Viper XC launched, landed. I trusted it more when I was in bumps. I preferred the communication over the Dudek Warp 2.
Steve Harper and I were talking last night. We had that guy go down in the canyon and had to rescue him. Another story.
Just a motor out.
Right. He landed on his feet.
Yeah.
It was just engine died. And I'm guessing it was just 5 minutes too lean on the low jet.
It was really lean.
Yeah. So it just died out. But he goes, I'm so happy I had the XC because I knew that I'd be able to launch again in that tight little spot with all those bushes and cactus and the little road that he had to go down to launch. That says a lot. And you're willing to put up with maybe more talkative, twitchy wing if you know you can get in and out of these spots effortlessly. Whereas in the Dudek...
I mean, you were on the Warp 2.
Yeah. They're not as light. They're not as... You need a little bit more energy to take off on those.
If you're launching and landing from tougher spots and you had to pick between the two, it's not a hard choice.
In today's realm. But keep in mind, I did it for 10 years of just flying a dude, even like the Report Air, the WRC, all these different wings of the Dudek, the Nucleon 2. We were flying them and we're landing in places we've never seen with river rock that you don't come in and do a foot drag or float across them because they're different size river rock. You have to come in and literally go flare, land on one foot, or you're going to twist an ankle, which I did. You're coming into uneven ground, unknown situations, and you did that last night. You went into a spot you'd never landed before. You just went into the wind, flared, landed. Boop, done. Help a guy carry his motor up. Boop, take off, done. That's knowing your wing, trusting your wing, and learning the characteristics of it, regardless of the manufacturer, designer, style. How easy a wing comes up is a big characteristic in deciding on which wing you may choose. But just to not pick it on your favorite of the XC, we did it with Dudek's more difficult launching wings for years.
I did it with the Warp 2. I landed on top of mountains.
Yep. I remember the APCO Force 2 was amazing wing.
I did a lot of sketchy Dominator launches.
I bet that.
And those didn't launch well.
Yeah. I never flew a Dominator, but I saw a few.
Would you like to? We have one coming this weekend.
I wouldn't mind.
It's a 16. No, it's a 19. It's one or the other.
I'll pass. Because for full disclosure here, I flew the your XC. It is the setup on it. It's a 20, right? Mm-hmm. XC20 with your version 1 hand toggles. The setup on that's brilliant. It felt so good, right at home, awesome. For me personally, the PK risers, no. I ended up, I know you do, but I ended up literally tearing my quad because I was on from full bar, half bar, quarter bar, half bar, full bar, half bar, quarter bar, half bar, full bar for an hour and a half. It's like doing a wall sit for an hour.
You know, they make these things at the gym that you could use that would make that easier.
It would, but not having done that for a couple of weeks before I flew your wing.
Did you push bar on the Warp 2? Because the Warp 2's PK risers.
Unfortunately, I've been banned from speed bar for another 2 or 3 days until my quad
would
heals.
love to hear how you feel about the Warp 2 after a night of doing that. I flew less last night on bar all night. This morning on bar all night. Mind you, I'm 25 years younger than you. So there's that. But I don't find it to be hard to press.
No, I've never find bars hard to press. That's not it. It's more, I will say, in my experience of watching thousands of pilots from all these different countries, very few people use bar.
Yeah. So I did a
And
poll.
okay.
27% of paramotor pilots do.
Yeah. So a quarter of the people are using bar, and of those quarter,
23%. Excuse me.
of those quarter, how often?
Not very often.
And to be quite honest, I use bar 5% of 10% at the most of my flying. So I'm not bar heavy. But you look at the different manufacturers, like going back to APCO. APCO had designed their wings super safe. 30% of their speed range was on trims, 70% on bar. Dudek is infamously known as being a 50-50. Not all their wings are that way, but 50% of your speed is going to be on trims, 50% on bar. When I've been testing all these different wings, that's one of my first tests is what is my speed range on trims full in, full out? Do I fly full in? No. Do I fly full out? Sometimes, but not a lot of hours are fully trimmed out. It's to catch up, it's to get somewhere quick, and then you trim back into something where you can be comfortable.
Yeah.
But that speed range is critically important to me because it means safety. If I'm going to get into a headwind and I can't penetrate, I need that additional speed. Colorado 2, what a fantastically easy, safe, no-brainer of a wing. It's beautiful the way it turns. It's beautiful the way it launches. Everything about that wing is easy. I love it. Its speed range? Not so much. You would need bar. So eliminating the bar conversation and just talk about trimmers.
So the non-PK risers on the Viper XC have longer trims.
Correct. And when I tested that, I got about 9 to 10 mile per hour speed differential trimmed in versus trimmed out. The Viper XC was one of those wings where if you're somebody like Scott Baxter, you're going to set it and forget it. That's how he flies his wings. Steve Harper, he flies the XC. He sets it at green, launches, lands, flies at green. Done.
That's me.
And then once in a while, pop the trimmers out if he wants to catch back up or go see something, or because he's always exploring and he's like the adventureman. The PK risers were not for me, but it would be awesome if you want to start playing with energy management and start playing with competition and
See, where PK risers come in so handy for me is when I'm flying with a group of students or just people, I can catch so fast. So if I have to go to the back for whatever reason, make sure someone's whatever, I can be back up front so fast. Because and if you're like flying tight together, the last thing you want to do is be trying to dick with trim buckles and releasing them. And if you're low, whatever. I just find speed bar in those places to shine. But if you're just trying to cruise somewhere, or you're trying to blast through thermals, it's definitely not the move.
In a group, speed bar is like
rules.
Because I'll see a coyote. I'll go find something that, shiny ball syndrome. You'll get, I'm going to go look at that.
Yeah.
And then you realize that everybody else went and looked at that. You have to catch up.
Mm-hmm. With speed bar, not to go on a tangent on speed bar, it's like I can have multiple flights within the same flight.
Yeah.
Because without it, it's like, okay, I'm going to go do this thing, and then I'm going to come back. But speed bar, I'm like, I'm going to go do this thing, and then I'm going to go over there, and I'm going to do this thing, and then I'm going to come back.
I know what happens to you. What happens to you is the song changes in your ears. And now you just fly different. I've seen it switch.
It happens.
So, yeah, I would say most of the pilots out there are using just trimmers.
I actually would argue out of that 70 whatever percent that never use speed bar, I bet you 50% have never touched trims. I bet you the 50% of that 50% have touched them like 5 times. Because the people you see here the people that are flying the more advanced gliders, there's not many of them. There's a lot of people out there on Spiders, Solos, Universals that just cruise and that's it.
You might be right, but all those people will be moving to an intermediate glider quickly. I mean, look how paracamping has changed. I mean, we used to go out and paracamp. Nobody was doing that. And now it's like the thing to go do. They've got bags for it, and they've got clip-ins, and everybody wants to go do it.
I still think maybe only... I'm totally just guessing, but I think only 20% of paramotor pilots progress past level 1 wings.
All right, we're not going to go there. Because then we start talking about what percentage actually keep their gear more than 100 hours. Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, continuing on about the characteristics, I've really enjoyed, you'd go fly something, come back, and it's like, you know, not splitting the hairs, but discussing the nuances where it's like, okay, well, the experience of this little thing on this was slightly different than on that.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and in beginner wings, but I think it's a little less important there. As you progress into the more intermediate advanced gliders, it's picking your poison.
You know, it's funny because it wasn't just about the hours on the Piper One. I thought the ITB Piper One was greatest thing since sliced bread. Just awesome wing for what I was doing.
Yeah.
And obviously there's plenty of other awesome wings out there that I would have been happy on. It's just what I ended up with at that period in history. I was almost waiting for that Piper 2 because I started hearing about the Piper 2 coming out. And I was like, oh, I'll get that, I'll get that soon. And it took like a little extra year to arrive.
Yeah.
As a lot of, it was refined and developed and then brought to market. And I flew that Piper 2, and I wish I had the 20 to fly at this elevation. And I flew the 22, and I was underwhelmed with it. It has all the great potential and characteristics, but maybe because it's still a Piper 1 evolved, but...
So let's talk about just the Piper 2.
I was underwhelmed by its flying characteristics. It's like it was still trying to be a Piper 1, but more efficient, but...
It was like it's trying to be two different things.
Yeah. A heavy brake pressure. Again, the square handles that pulled my arms out and back. And that was my first experience. It's like I had built it up to be a better Piper 1. And when I got in, it was so different that change surprised me.
Yeah.
And I immediately went, oh, that's not what I expected. And I need to fly. It just sold, like the 20 sold like within 24 hours, so I didn't get a chance. 48 hours. They'll go to quick and to other people, but it's not what I expected.
I was and am surprised that the reflex profile is different.
Right? They got rid of it, like half of it.
It's just gone. Because the Piper 1, from what I remember, you couldn't let it just wouldn't really frontal on the ground.
Solid.
It wouldn't collapse. It'd like hit this almost barrier and just bounce off of it. And the Piper 2 will just disappear.
The Piper 1 was brilliant.
That was what made the Piper so special. That was always the thing to me. It's like, what's so great about the Piper? Well, you get this absolutely rock solid wing.
I bought the Piper 1 for 3 reasons, or chose the Piper 1 for 3 over the Luna 2 was my second choice.
Yeah.
And there was Colorado 1 and etc. All great wings. I got the Piper 1 because it had full reflex profile, huge amounts of stability in trimming out. I felt confident being half trim, 3/4 trim. It was solid. Once you got past half trim, it was super solid, and you could still active pilot it if you wanted to. And in full reflex, locked on rails, it was really stable. Second reason, it flew fast. I mean, like, it was probably one of the fastest wings out at the time. This is back in 2021. It was the rocket ship. In addition, you can fly slow. I remember Matt Minyard was out on the beach here at the Salton Sea, And he's like, "You want to try my Piper 1?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's the wing I definitely want to try." He had an 18 Piper 1, and first flight on that, I was just testing it where it would kind of break on the where it would get mushy in the brakes. So I kept burying the brakes, burying the brakes. I got a full flare, and I'm 6 inches off the ground with 60, 70, 80% power, 70% power on the motor. And with a 6 mile an hour headwind, I was almost hovering above the ground, not moving, full flare, 70%. You couldn't stall it.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was, I'm like, Matt, this is phenomenal
Yeah.
wing. So he's super slow, rocket ship fast. That speed range to me means safety. I can fly with my buddies trimmed slower that are on older previous style wings, or I can go catch up to them. Even just with trimmers, it was like, I think 11 or 12 mile an hour speed differential on just trims. Phenomenal. You lost it with the Paper 2. You lost that rock solid feeling. You lost that speed range. It felt like it was trying to get
It's trying to be efficient.
and in an efficiency, you lost the full reflex.
And it was the full reflex that made it so special to me.
Yeah.
And the speed
And
and
what's
the
made
brake
it
range.
different from the Gin and the Ozone and the other choices that you have in the field.
Now it feels like it's just a version of those. There isn't. Where's the specialty? I haven't found it.
It's almost similar to the Warp 2 now.
It felt like you haven't flown the
But
Drift
not
Air,
as
have you?
solid. Huh?
You haven't flown a Drift Air, have you?
Not yet.
It's just a less efficient Drift Air.
I shouldn't even say this on camera, but then you hear Drift Air is difficult to launch.
Trim it to 6. It's not.
Trim it to 6. So there's the trick. But high altitude, like my normal LZs at
easier
5,000,
than a warp.
6,000 feet, yeah, then you're going to have to launch it like a typical dudek, a little bit more energy.
So I found the Drift Air to be the most ozone launching dudek there is.
Remember when Tucker Gott
Try to warp one.
put out a video on one of the dudeks? I don't remember which wing it was, and he says you couldn't launch it.
It was the warp one.
He's so used to that ozone, easy effort, easy, just
That's
lift it up and it comes right up, and he gets onto a dudek, and he's like, I couldn't launch it. Well, you got to change your technique for that style of
Well,
wing.
the other thing is you had to trim 0.
Oh, it'll never come up.
Trim the Viper XC to 0 all the way in and have fun launching that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think generally on the dudeks, I found if you trim them to 6, which is 3 past what everyone recommends, it's way easier. And the Drift Air
If you're
was
25 and you can run like a gazelle,
use a little brake
okay.
because
I'm
you
just
can
saying,
compensate with that. You
When
can
you've got a-
compensate for the trims out a little more brake.
when you've got a blown quad because you've been standing on bar for an hour and a half, you're going to trim it to 3 and launch it at 3.
I got hurt ankle here. But yeah, the Piper 2 felt like it was trying to be a Drift Air. It just burns more fuel. That was all.
Boy, does it. I was 1,200 RPM more at the same altitude, same conditions. Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to fly it again to get I think I've only...
So I changed the
Wait.
brake toggles.
Okay.
So I want you to fly the 22 again.
So we haven't talked about the elephant in the room. And that is, obviously when a manufacturer makes a wing, they scale it. They design a certain wing and then they'll do an 88% scale for a smaller size, or they'll start in the middle range usually and they'll scale it down for different weight ranges at different sizes. Every once in a while when you design a wing, manufacturers design a wing, it completely changes the flight characteristics of the wing when they scale it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people would sit there and say, oh gosh, this wing in a 22 flies beautifully, but I tried the 24 because I might be at higher elevation, and it's not even the same wing. At the higher elevation, the characteristics, flight characteristics, and pilotage characteristics of the wing totally change. Let's talk about the Piper 218.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't blown a launch in a while, and it was extremely humbling for me to pull a wing up. The Piper 218 came right up overhead. I'm like, I feel it. It is it's there, and then it wasn't. And the whole thing just balled up into a little tissue and fell down. I'm like, what was that? do I have the trims in the wrong place? What is going on? I was all confused. I set it up again. I launched it and gave it initial A pressure, gave it energy, and I didn't want to run too far, too much because of my quad, and I hit a little bit of brake, not too much, and the thing basically tip stalled because of the brake pressure. I don't know what happened, to be honest.
Yeah.
All I know is the wing stalled, and they said, people standing around said, my feet went up in the air. I almost went horizontal. I let up on the brakes. It shot forward, and I skid landed on my feet. And I'm like, what was that? What happened? And I remember Mo came over and with Team Fly Halo, and he's like, dude, you just relax. It'll be okay. I'm like, I know, right? Pulled it up into a reverse this time so I could watch to see what was happening. Turned around, spun, and as I turned around, the wing just went like a 180 upside down. I eventually, that next launch, got off the ground with it. I don't know what happened. I don't know why, but it's like that scaling effect. The 18 is a totally different wing than the Piper 20 or 22, which came up so easy and effortlessly and typical Piper.
I blew my first launch on the Piper 1, or
Then
Piper
I
2
heard-
18 as well.
Then I heard the same thing happen to you you blew like 2 launches, right?
Just one. It came up and just went, hit the ground, even though I was in the brakes catching it. It just completely frontaled, gave out, and fell.
Disappeared. It's just
disappeared.
like a tissue.
Yep.
What is that? What happened? Why would, I mean, I'm not a good pilot, but I think I can launch just about anything out there. What happened?
I don't know. It was like an AWOC. You never experienced the AWOC.
No, I've seen the launches on the AWOC.
Yeah.
You kind of have to try 3 times while you're still kiting it.
It just like totally ragdolled. That totally threw me out. I lost all trust in the reflex profile on that 18. I just didn't feel like I could trust it in bumps because I'm like, okay, well, if that's how
Launching it that way?
No, in the sky.
Oh, really?
That just lost all my trust because I'm like, okay, well, if you're going to give out like that on the ground, you'll probably give out like that in the air. And
Nah.
I don't trust that 18.
Dudeks are, going back to Dudek, even though we're talking ITV Piper too, but Dudeks are infamously known to be difficult to kite on the ground.
This is true, but even the Warp 1,
fly fantastic.
It would kind of bounce off that reflex a little bit before it would just go out.
True.
It showed signs of that reflex was there. It was
So
active.
what's with the taco fold up into a ball and fall down?
I don't know.
Yeah.
The 22 did it too.
I think it's a scaling thing, but maybe because it wasn't conditions.
No. It's interesting.
Could have been because I was tired.
I mean, I wasn't.
Okay. Yeah, it happened to you.
I hit brakes hard.
It was weird.
Yeah. That's what it felt like to me. I was like, I literally say on video, I'm like, well, that was weird.
Well,
While it just completely gave out on me.
could it be that they have the
Were we
brakes
trim
set
drawn?
10 centimeters shorter than it should have been?
Well, the shorter would indicate we'd stall it.
That's what
not
I did.
Frontal. I didn't. You frontaled one of them. I
First
frontaled
one
one of
was.
them. You stalled the others. That could be. I think they sent in with brakes and tip too tight, personally.
Yeah, too tight.
Too tight.
So
I mean, it's fun, but you shouldn't start there.
when I flew it, I didn't even use brake. All I had to do was turn my hand like this, and it dove to whatever side.
That's
that
right.
2D
It was like they were going for
slalom. Yes.
with it.
It
Missed
was
the
too
mark.
much, too quick.
Yeah.
And it made me a little nervous on the 18 flying that. Like it dove and it turned.
The 18, it was a little nerve-wracking. I really like the 22 and 25 on the trike. It drinks fuel, but I have enjoyed the 25.
Didn't Scott Roos try the 25 on a trike?
Uh-huh.
What did he say?
Well, he kept going on and on about not liking the brake setup.
They were short.
They're so tight.
And if you're flying a trike, say this to anybody listening, lengthen those brakes if you're sitting lower.
See, the reason I've been liking it is I'm flying the PAP trike. The hooking points are lower. His was higher.
The PAP trike is hooking into essentially your harness.
Right. The hooking points are also low hooking points instead
Yeah.
of mid, which should be what the
A
Scout
lot of
is.
these guys are flying where wing is attaching to the trike.
Yes.
The PAP attaches to your swing arms.
Right, but he's flying the Scout one, and it's a mid-hook in. So anyways, it just was, his hands are
He still
high.
has the weight shift.
Yeah, his hands were high,
Yeah.
which made him uncomfortable. But he
Yeah.
said played fine, launched fine, landed fine.
He spent a long time on it.
Yeah.
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 And his hang point wasn't quite the same.
What I have been seeing is there's nothing to write home about, and there's just nothing to complain about. Is kind of the feedback. I'm like, oh, it's fine. But what was special about it?
Again, first impressions are often changed once you spend more time on things. I felt that ITV nailed the Piper 1. Absolutely knocked it out of the ballpark. I got on the Piper 2, and I'm like, what happened?
Yeah. Well, let's move on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Viper XC.
You want to talk about the Viper XC, don't you?
Talk about the Warp 2. I love the Warp 2. Let's talk about the Warp 2.
The Warp 2 carved it up. The Warp 2 was solid as a rock. The Warp 2 was exhausting. It launched like a dudek, came up like it should, just got to hit it harder. I hate to try to compare it to a vehicle, so I'm not, but the Warp 2 was like rock solid race car fun.
Here's what I like to say.
The other Ozones, Gins, etc., they have more cush.
And this doesn't directly translate to exactly what you were saying, but I like to think of the Dudex reflex like you're in a Baja truck hitting bumps at like 80, where they just disappear.
And do you want to go to the grocery store in a Baja truck?
But the other wings are like doing 30, where you're still feeling it.
Yeah.
And so the Dudex just kind of muffle out the bumps a little bit, whereas the other wings give you those bumps.
You're feeling bumps more in Falcon 2, XC, Luna 3, all these other wings. You're feeling more bump.
Yeah.
But doesn't make them less stable. It feels less stable. And that's kind of where I'm needing to shift my head a little bit. All these years of flying cross country, you want that feeling of stability. But you lose, again, with the feeling of stability, a lot of times you lose fun and the cush of I'm flying.
Yeah.
And these newer generation of wings are focused more on stability, and you lose, more and more on efficiency, but you're losing some of that stability.
Yeah.
I'm slowly starting to get a full picture after flying all these different wings where the designers
Are going
with this new generation. And I say new generation like the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Because generations go quickly with wings. Is that helping? Are we getting...
I think we're done.
Yeah.
I think we wrap it. Scott, I appreciate the feedback. Appreciate the conversation. I'm going to get you a beautiful set of V2 toggles in compensation for this.
I look forward to that.
Yes. Thank you guys for putting up with, I don't know how long this is, probably an hour and a half of rambling. That was the whole point of it. We're going to chat. Podcast, talk, whatever direction it ends up going. If you liked this style of video, let me know in the comment section down below. I'm going to try and film a couple more like this with some other people. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next time.